Hi guys, I'm Adam Wilborn from WhatCulture.
And I'm Andy Murray from WhatCulture.
And don't forget, if you want to listen to the news as a podcast when you're out and about, you can do so by searching for WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from. But coming up today, loads of news basically, including, is the Wednesday Night War over?
Kenny Omega has responded to criticism of AEW's women's division, and I'm going to tell you, why am I pointing to me, what he said.
The latest on the future of Shayna Baszler.
An update on WWE's original plans for Chelsea Green.
The latest on the future of Tyson Fury.
Another major American wrestling promotion might be about to get a big TV deal.
And what can only be described as a very weird story about Sgt Slaughter. This is the news.
We're going to kick things off. We've actually got 3 straight AEW stories in a row, so get your bias comments out the way, call us paid shills, do this, that, and the next thing. But the first thing we're going to report is the real reason AEW feels like WCW is not because of guys like Arn Anderson and DDP. It's not because Cody absolutely loves certain eras of WCW, and it's not because of the Russo comparisons that arise whenever we get angles like this week's one with the Nightmare Collective. No! The real reason AEW feels like WCW Nitro is because Tony Khan has been studying the show.
I thought it was because they lost $64 million this year.
According to a new report from PW Insider, which offers a number of different insights on AEW's creative process, they say that in preparation for Dynamite's launch, Tony Khan spent a lot of time studying Nitro, studying what worked on that show, what made its best episode so compelling, and trying to incorporate that into AEW. And you know, when you throw out a WCW comparison, it's not usually a complimentary thing, right? It's usually like, oh, look at this nonsense, look at this silly TNA WCW stuff. But to be fair, a good episode of Dynamite, and there have been plenty, does indeed feel like a good episode of Nitro. There's a real thread running through both of those shows, and you can really see the influence paying off. On top of
this is really how WWE booked their own downfall, because he's on the network watching old episodes of Nitro.
He's got his $9.99 a month, but it's going to reap more in ratings and so forth. Anyway, on top of this, they also go into a little bit of Khan's role in the creative process. They call him the driving force behind most of some of AEW's biggest programs. They cite the recent Jon Moxley, Chris Jericho, Inner Circle thing as one of them. PW Insider also notes the executive vice presidents, Kenny, Cody, the Young Bucks. They have a lot of creative control when it comes to their own stuff, but at the end of the day, Tony is basically Vince McMahon. He has the final say on everything that goes down on that show. Similar role to Vince in WWE. He's the daddy, he's the man, he's the one pressing the OK button.
It makes a lot of sense, these reports, because I recently re-listened to the Moxley-Jericho interview when he first appeared in AEW, and he does talk about how the fact that what he likes about Tony Khan is he just clearly is just a massive nerd like the rest of us for wrestling. You can go back and talk about old episodes of Nitro or ECW or random pay-per-views. Yeah. And you're right, in terms of a sort of model to study, especially when you're studying a model to counter WWE, I mean, WCW, you know, pre-99, 2000 sort of time.
Before it went,
yeah. Don't watch 2000 WCW and think, oh, I should be doing stuff like this.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get Tank Abbott in a tank top and all this stuff.
Let's continue, though, talking about AEW, because they smashed NXT in the ratings this week.
You've got an actual ring, so do the MJF thing.
Made them kiss the ring.
Yeah, there you go.
Because AEW scored 947,000 to NXT's 721,000, almost doubling their total in the 18 to 49 demo as well. A big victory for AEW. I will caveat this, despite the fact you're still going to call me an AEW shill in the comments, with the fact that there was no NXT the previous week. AEW had booked a huge show this week. There was people comparing it to a sort of takeover card, but as Michael Sidgwick said, maybe it's just a good episode of TV.
Yeah.
You had championship matches, you had Moxley, of course, whether or not he was going to join the Inner Circle. I think the big takeaway here is this is great news, obviously, for AEW, and it's not great news for NXT in terms of it's a relatively low rating for them, but it's over 1.6 million people watching wrestling on a Wednesday night. So whether you're a fan of NXT or AEW, or as you should be, a fan of both like most of us are, It's just good news. And this is getting closer and closer to Michael Hamflett's prediction that these two shows combined will surpass something like Monday Night Raw in the viewership.
Yeah, that's definitely the most encouraging thing, isn't it? The total number overall. I think that that AEW were only dropped 20,000 viewers on the previous week, I believe. That's a success, and it shows that, as my man Tony Maglio, who's not my man, I've never met him, from The Wrap pointed out on Twitter, TV expert, momentum plus marketing equals ratings. They had the momentum coming out of last week's show, and this week's one was very well advertised. What I think is going to be really interesting is next week.
Yes.
Because it's safe to say that this week's episode of Dynamite did not go down particularly well among the commentariat, among critics, among basically a huge portion of people who watched it. Personally, I didn't like the show very much myself. No. Are people going to stick around for that next week? Is NXT going to swing back into the lead?
They've got that Battle Royal to see who's going to face Rhea Ripley at TakeOver as well, which should be really good. And more Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic, Matt Riddle and Pete Dunne, the Broserweights. I'm so excited for them. And the return of the Time Splitters, I should say, or the reuniting of the Time
Lots of stuff going on. Bash at the Beach for AEW as well. Yeah. That's going to look so cool on TV. Man,
it's great times to be a wrestling fan. That's the big takeaway here.
Wrestling's good.
Yeah.
And so are you.
Okay, should we talk more about AEW?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, what have you got?
Shills. It's actually my turn. What am I doing? Total mess here. I've got some words from Kenny Omega, who yesterday did a rare Twitter Q&A, opening himself up to questions from the fans, of course. And perhaps the most interesting stuff on this, particularly after the way this week's Dynamite went with the Nightmare Collective angle, is his comments on the women's division and the criticism it has received. So at one point, Twitter user Mark Red Believer, asked, "Who do you consider the face of the women's division?" Kenny replied, "Still developing the face of the division, but Rio's proven to be an inspiration to many. Shida is the complete package, and Chris Statlander has shown that she has the tools to take the division to a different level." Nice stuff there. But he was also asked by another Twitter user here, Zeko __. Sure, that's your real name. Kenny replied saying, he was asked, "What do you think of the criticisms Levy did at the women's division?" He replied, saying that lately most criticisms I read are incredibly ignorant, depressing the amount of fans that have no class. That being said, I do try to sift through these to get to the actual constructive criticism. It's understandable that Kenny might come across a bit defensive here because he's very closely involved. He's at least partly responsible for the booking of the division. He's very responsible for the Joshi link-up, and he has taken great involvement in all of that. But at the same time, it's good that he's acknowledging the constructive criticisms because there are many of them, particularly this week after what looked like an excellent match between Rio and Chris Statlander was kind of derailed.
Yeah, I think my issue is it's not that they haven't got the talent in the women's division. It's just kind of getting a little bit muddled. Like you say, Riho versus Chris Statlander on paper with the likes of Hikaru Shida and Britt Baker watching on.
Yeah.
And then presumably, getting involved in storylines is relating to that going forward is great. It was just all the bollocks of, oh, look, here's Dr. Luther and Kong and that, was it Melanie Lewis?
Mel Cruz.
Mel Cruz. Melanie Lewis is an old friend of mine.
Yeah.
Shout out to you, Mel.
Hello, Mel.
But yeah, I think there are definite areas for improvement, but it's not like we need complete wholesale changes of the personnel in the women's division.
Tweak the nuts and bolts, get the best out of them, put them in the spotlight. Let's see what happens.
Speaking of women, though, let's talk a little bit about Shayna Baszler. Loads of speculation on her future, of course. She is, I think, everyone's pick to win the Women's Royal Rumble this year.
Dana Brooke.
And no appearance on NXT following Rhea Ripley's win at the end of last year, of course, either. And barely, well, I don't think there was a mention of her aside from the fact that she got beaten by Rhea Ripley. Yeah. And according to a Wrestling Observer Radio, Shayna Baszler is looking likely to be on Raw, quote, sooner rather than later. I'd guess sometime after the 26th of January.
Yeah, after she wins the Royal Rumble and challenges Raw Women's Champion Becky Lynch.
Good stuff. This is exactly what they need. It's the perfect storyline heading into WrestleMania for me.
Yeah.
And I know they sometimes go, oh, should we go for the obvious Royal Rumble winner? Is that too... Just do it. Yeah. That's all we want.
Pull the trigger, make it happen. It'll be great. Also, speaking of women who wrestle, Chelsea Green and Deonna Purrazzo. Chelsea Green made a decent impact on this week's episode of NXT.
Yeah.
She attacked Mia Yim and her opponent, Kaden Carter. I'm sorry, I'm terrible. Aligning with Robert Stone, a new little faction growing there. But Dave on Wrestling Observer Radio has a wee update on what WWE's original plans were for Chelsea and her NXT tag partner, her old tag partner at least, on the house shows, Deonna Purrazzo. He stated that the duo were being considered for a hot-shotted call-up to Raw or SmackDown. That's why both of them recently wrestled on Raw in losing efforts to Charlotte Flair and Asuka, respectively. They were trying them out, they were seeing how it was going to work, but now that Chelsea has debuted on NXT, she is seen in particular as off-limits for a call-up anytime soon. Quite interesting stuff there. They weren't being used on NXT TV. They may have thought, hey, these two are really talented, but we don't quite have room for them in NXT. Let's put them on Raw or SmackDown or see what happens. Either way, I think they're both very good performers, and I'm just looking forward to seeing what they could do, man.
Absolutely, and I'm predicting big things for Chelsea Green as part of that Robert Stone thing. I'm looking forward to see what they're doing there. Right, okay. It's time for a pinch of WrestleVotes, because according to the relatively reliable WrestleVotes, the future of Tyson Fury is, well, not up in the air, but very much dependent on what happens in his rematch, of course, against Deontay Wilder for the World Heavyweight Championship of Boxing or whatever it is. I like boxing, I just don't know exactly what the belt is. WBC, maybe, something like that.
I like it too, but it's hard to follow.
Yes, Fury versus Wilder 2, after the first match, of course, ended in a draw, is set for February 22nd, and the result of that fight will kind of determine Tyson Fury's future in WWE. It's understandable, really, that Vince McMahon wouldn't really want to book or even pay someone who's just lost so publicly and is no longer the lineal world heavyweight champion like Tyson Fury if he loses to Deontay Wilder on February 22nd. But if he wins, you can probably expect an appearance from Tyson Fury, I'd guess, at WrestleMania 36.
Yeah, be interesting to see what comes of this. He had that match, obviously.
It was so funny.
Crown Jewel. He's a funny guy, man. Like, the ring entrance for that match was actually pretty spectacular.
Yeah. He's a great character, and also often overlooked, he's got an incredible story behind his redemption arc.
Sure, yeah.
He's got a very checkered past and some dodgy stuff in his
got to acknowledge those
in his history. But in terms of an inspirational story slash just charismatic performer, he sort of really fits the mold for WrestleMania, I'd say.
Like, the match might not be all that good, but if he just comes down and knocks someone out, that's all you need, right?
Exactly.
That's all you need.
Having wearing all the
stuff.
Yeah,
all the things.
All the things.
All
clothes.
the fire. Yeah, he wears clothes. Speaking of people who wear clothes, the good folks over at MLW and their head honcho, Court Bauer, may be on the verge of launching, taking their Fusion Weekly TV show to Showtime in the USA. Now, this is quite a big deal, because Showtime is a network that have lots of combat sports experience in the background and were previously in negotiations with AEW before TNT came along and said, nope, that's going to be ours. So could we soon see MLW Fusion go from YouTube and be in sports to where it currently is to going on Showtime? That would be really cool. There have been lots of reports lately of Bauer being in LA for top secret TV level meetings. I think it would be really sweet to see guys like Jacob Fatu, guys like Filthy Tom Lawler, the Contra Unit, all these dudes low-key, even as on that roster on television. Might create a few problems with guys like MJF, who regularly performs for MLW. Don't think AEW are going to let him go out on a major network like Showtime while also competing on TNT. But good news, there's a lot of wrestling on TV at the moment, and it's really hard to keep up without driving yourself mad. But the MLW product is a strong one, and one that I believe could use some extra exposure.
Yeah, I hope so. There's so much good wrestling going on right now. Right, I'm just going to open the cupboard of news and slip one more story in there. This one's very sort of surreal. It surrounds Sgt Slaughter, and he's being called out at the moment for talking about his worked military background as if it was real in non-kayfabe interviews. Now, the story behind his character is, of course, he was a drill instructor in the Marines. He was talking about that as recently as February 2019 to Sam Roberts and Jim Norton. He talked about serving 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. He's also claimed he served 6 years in the Marine Corps from 1966 until 1973. But there's an issue because he started wrestling for AWA in 1972 and all the way back in 1985 before both of us were born.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
The Baltimore Sun reported that the Marines wrote a letter to the former WWE champion and asked him to stop being pretending he was a Marine. They received 50 complaints once in a year against Sgt Slaughter from actual Marines, and what was said was what they really didn't like, and we know of 2 such cases, is when his opponents staged attacks on people wearing dressed blue uniforms whom we strongly believe were not Marines, and then Slaughter came in and rescued those guys. Now, this is really interesting. We kind of have to tread carefully here because there's been arguments made online of, oh, what's the issue here?
Yeah.
He's just playing a wrestling character. You don't have a pop at Repo Man, shout out Simon Miller, or anyone like that. But the issue here, of course, is stolen valor, which is a big issue and arguably even bigger over in the States.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, this, because Sarge had previously claimed that his wrestling character, which is obviously fictional, was informed by his real-life military background. But, of course, he comes from a different era, doesn't he? And it's a very tricky situation to analyse and pick apart and find a stance on. It's one that I'm not willing to take a particularly strong stance on because of that, but, you know, have it out in the comment section below.
Exactly. Let's move on to your Twitter questions at WhatCulture WWE, of course, if you want to get in touch. Gupta starts us off with the first question of today, saying, if we were to book a dream match between WWE stars and AEW stars, which match would you book? Personally, I'd love to watch Luchasaurus versus Keith Lee.
Oh, that'd be so much fun, wouldn't it? All the big lads.
I know we sort of dealt with this before, but I just saw this, and my brain... I'm slowly turning into Vince McMahon, apparently. My brain went, Big Show versus Marco Stunt.
Imagine Big Show punching
Just
Marco
like that.
Stunt.
I know Vince loves this with like Rey Mysterio's nose to nipple moment with Great Khali, but Marco Stunt doing that and then just getting punched in the face. I don't know why. I'm a glutton for punishment. Congratulations to Marco Stunt on a great reaction on Dynamite, by the way, this week.
I've got two, and I think they both speak for themselves. The first one is Kenny Omega versus Roman Reigns. Actually, I've got three. The second one is Kenny Omega versus Daniel Bryan. The third one is the Young Bucks versus the Revival.
Make it happen. Steen Skov, I hope I've got that correct, asks, have you noticed that the Evolution pay-per-view has been moved to the retired pay-per-view section on the WWE Network? And I thought I'd use that as a jumping off point of asking you whether you think it'll ever come back.
Yeah, I do think it'll come back at some point. You know, the cynical take on Evolution is that it was a make good for the women's wrestlers not being able to perform in Saudi Arabia. Turned out to be one of the better pay-per-views of that year. It was a really good show. I know, like, loads of people were personally disappointed when this happened and when it was moved and when the second one wasn't announced for 2019. I do think it'll come back. I think women's wrestling is too strong for WWE for it not to. But there's also a lot to be said about the integration. You know, maybe if you really want to treat the woman as equal, then mix the shows up, put them on. But at the same time, you only get, one or two women's matches on a pay-per-view these days, so more opportunities. It's a balanced argument. I'd like to see it come back. Great. It was a great show last time. I'd say right now is arguably the strongest ever time for women's wrestling in WWE. Because we've talked about Raw and SmackDown, and that was obviously big when the first Evolution happened. And NXT was doing well at the time. But you look now, there's so many people in NXT. In NXT UK, there's a women's championship match on NXT UK this weekend, of course. And then on Raw and SmackDown, the exposure would be great. I think there's going to be another Evolution this year. I hope so.
Right, I'm going to attempt this name, and I do apologise. I'm going to butcher it. Shriyat Shrivastava. I hope I've got that right, Shriyat. Says, since all the major wrestling companies have had their premiere episodes for this year, which one do you think had the best show? Hashtag Cleary bias to on NXT.
Oh man, poor Cleary. The best premiere episode. Here comes the bias. But AEW for me, the first January episode, loved it. I thought it was just a really good wrestling show. Had a couple of problems here and there with it, but nothing major to disrupt my enjoyment of the show. I think NXT, this week's NXT was really good. Wasn't particularly outstanding or anything. I don't think it was one of the better shows NXT's put forth. But man, this week's Raw was also really quite a great show, but narrow edge to Dynamite for me last week.
Do you know what I'm going to go with? SmackDown. Because I had really low estimations, and we had Sheamus, the Usos, John Morrison coming back. I'm really excited about SmackDown.
That.
We'll be doing SmackDown preview a little bit later on today. Let's move on to today's and finally, and a very quick shout out and a massive thank you to Hunter Schmitz for these wonderful figures that he sent us.
Mate.
These are from 1986,
They're beautiful, aren't they, man?
They're little wrestling toys that his Dad gave him. So Hunter, thank you so much for sending them to us. They look magnificent. If you want to send us anything to add to our wonderful, weird wrestling set behind us, please feel free to do so. But Hunter, thank you so much for that. And very quickly, make sure you join us 5:30 p.m. GMT tonight. We're going to be doing a live stream, just a bit of banter basically, a little bit of fun, all raising money of course for the Aussie bushfire fundraiser. Terrible things happening out there, so any way we can raise money is great. So we're going to be doing that from 5:30 tonight, so make sure you join us for that. Right, let us know your thoughts on all of today's news stories in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts. Plus let us know your thoughts on Twitter and your Twitter questions at WhatCulture WWE. Or should there follow both of us? You can follow him at
Andy H. Murray. The H stands for Hayabusa.
You can follow me at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at WhatCulture WWE. As I said, my thanks to Andy Murray. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon. Hi guys, I'm Adam Wilborn from WhatCulture, here to let you know we want your live event videos, whether that be something that happened after the cameras stopped rolling, or your reaction to something amazing that went down at the show you were at. Stuff like this.
One of the other sweetest things I've ever seen was just recently when we saw Roman Reigns kick the shit out of cancer and come back on Monday Night Raw.
So make sure you send them to us in all the usual ways. You can tweet them at us, you can send them to us on Facebook, you can email them to us. Hell, if it's your sort of thing, you can stick them on a memory stick and post them to WhatCulture. But the one thing you need to remember is good, bad. Thanks for watching. Bye.